I'd like to focus a little on our history in addition to our structure and how it is that we do business. In other words, the building blocks of our particular denomination. As you know, in the beginning, there was one church, and over time, many developed. As I mentioned last week, we united Methodists along with other Methodist and Wesleyan bodies around the world, find our roots and thus our common heritage in the lives and ministries of John and Charles Wesley, second generation priests in the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. Following a failed assignment as missionaries to the then colony of Georgia in the New World, John and Charles went back to England, disillusioned and discouraged and demoralized, feeling probably what every pastor at one time or another experiences. However, on that ship back to England, they had a chance encounter with a group of Moravian Christians, and it proved to be the spark that would reignite their floundering faith. And it led to a spiritual revival of the Church of England that would eventually find its way into the New World, into America. In America, Methodism, as this new movement came to be known, was primarily a lay movement. It was begun by settlers who brought with them an enthusiasm for the gospel and a dedication to the teachings of Christ, things that they had learned in early Methodist classes or societies that they'd been a part of back home in England. You see, the Wesleys wisely realized all those years ago that the real key to making disciples of Jesus lies in small groups, places where people can be held accountable regarding their walk with Christ and their actions as followers of Jesus. As the movement grew here in the New World, John Wesley sent lay preachers, not Anglican priests, since obviously he didn't have the authority to do that. They were lay people that were coming to undergird the growing Methodist societies in America, one of whom was a person named Francis Asbury, a man who would go on to become one of the most influential figures in early American Methodism. As you could read on the umc.org website, Asbury's energetic devotion to the principles of Wesleyan theology, ministry, and organization shaped Methodism in America in a way unmatched by any other individual. That's why you find Asbury's name often in Methodist circles. The first conference of Methodist preachers in the colonies was held in Philadelphia in 1773. 10 preachers came together, and they took several important actions at that conference or meeting. They pledged allegiance to Wesley's leadership, and they agreed that they would not administer the sacraments because they were lay people, and only priests were allowed to administer the sacraments. People were to go to their local Anglican parish for the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper. However, the American Revolution had a significant impact on the direction that Methodism in the United States would take. Following America's independence from England, Wesley recognized the necessity of changes in the American Methodist movement. The two were no longer connected the way they once were. And so in 1776, Wesley sent Thomas Coke and named him and Francis Asbury as the first superintendents of the movement in the New World. Coke and Asbury, Cokesbury, names again that you'll hear often in Methodist circles. Wesley also sent 2 other preachers who he himself had ordained along with a prayer book called the Sunday Service of the Methodists in North America, which Wesley had prepared and which contained a revised version of the Church of England's 39 Articles of Religion. No surprise then that this new movement, as we talked about last time, which would eventually become a church, retains a strong Anglican It's an Anglican priest who gives it life. In December 1784, at the famous Christmas conference at Lovely Lane Chapel in Baltimore, Maryland, preachers met to chart the future of Methodism in America. And it was at this gathering that the movement became a church. It was called the Methodist Episcopal Church. And it elected its first two bishops, Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury. In the years following, the Methodist Episcopal Church published its first book of discipline in 1785, adopted a quadrennial general conference. It would get together every 4 years, the first being in 1792. They drafted a constitution, they refined the structure of the church, and they established a publishing house. So began a series of adaptations and changes, divisions and unifications that would, in 1968 in Dallas, Texas, some of you remember that, some of you were there, culminated in what we now know as the United Methodist Church, the Connection, as it's often called. The United Methodist Church has been shaped and reformed over time, and there's no reason to expect that the process of finding what's best for a particular era won't continue as we move into the future. The church is the people, and at the pleasure of the people, their representatives have the power to reshape and restructure the church as they see fit. From this you see, one of the issues, of course, was segregation. The United Methodist Church took a stand by uniting. So let's look briefly at each of the pieces or the building blocks that make up our church. For many of you, this will be a review. Some of you may not understand how it is that the Methodist Church is put together. Again, we recognize that time won't allow us to examine every detail at length. So again, I'm speaking generally, recognizing that there can and are exceptions. But the one thing that has always been true, and always will be true, is that the foundation of the Methodist Church is Christ. The official mission of the UMC is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. That mission statement echoes what the writer of today's letter to the Ephesians was saying in chapter 2. Listen to verses 19 through 22. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people, and also members of His household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus Himself as the chief cornerstone. In Him, the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in Him, you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by His Spirit. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Christ is the cornerstone, and upon Him the church is built. Now, the piece of the church with which we are most familiar is the local congregation. There are, as you might guess, thousands of United Methodist congregations around the world. And each one has at least one pastor who's been appointed by the bishop to oversee the function and care of that group. In the Methodist Church, we don't elect or call the minister. It's an appointive system. Ministers come as they are appointed. Sometimes those pastors are highly educated. Sometimes they've received far less training. Some of them are still being trained. But each one has vowed to conduct the business of the church according to the rules that apply to all who call themselves United Methodists. As you know, we have boards and committees here in the local church that are required by our Book of Discipline, the basic rule book of the church. And they function according to the rules that are laid out in that book. Yet, like the structure, rules are also fluid and can be changed with time as deemed necessary by the larger body. When a congregation needs to conduct official business or make changes in leadership, They convene in what is called a charge conference or a church conference. Once a year, we come together in a charge conference. We approve the pastor's salary and we elect leadership for the next year. And often there's other business that takes place at that meeting. The bishop, who is an elected official of the church, oversees the congregations of his or her annual conference. Now, I have to tell you, when I became a Methodist, the whole idea of an annual conference was very confusing to me, because I had always thought of a conference as a meeting, and it is a meeting. People coming together to do work or receive training, to vote on issues, that sort of thing. But if you think sports, a conference is an alliance. The teams or the congregations in a conference are aligned with each other. Okay? And usually that's because they share a particular geographic territory, but not always. We are part of the Central Texas Conference, which spreads from Alney to Round Rock and from Kearns to Ballinger. That's our annual conference. The Episcopal residence is in Fort Worth. The bishop lives there, and the conference office is also in Fort Worth. It's now located on the campus of Texas Wesleyan University. Now, because that's a lot of territory and a lot of preachers and congregations to oversee, a conference is divided into districts, and the bishop appoints each a superintendent, a DS as we call them, the district superintendent. That person oversees the ministry, the appointment of ministers to serve the district's churches. The DS presides at meetings of the charge conference and oversees the programs within that district. Together, the bishop and the district superintendents, along with the lay leader and some other annual conference staff, make up what we call the cabinet. The cabinet. We now have 5 district superintendents. Once we had 7, but a change was made by vote of the clergy and the representatives from local churches who've been elected to send to annual conference on their behalf. The annual conference, as in the yearly meeting, is where we conduct business, approve decisions, set the conference budget, debate issues, and covenant with each other to do or not do certain kinds of things. Every annual conference also elects representatives to attend the jurisdictional conference and the general conference. Now, just an aside, outside the United States, the annual conferences are aligned in what we call central conferences rather than jurisdictional. Okay? Jurisdictions are territorial alignments. Again, the bringing together of annual conferences, and their main purpose is to elect bishops. Every 4 years they come together, they elect bishops, they nominate people for the general boards and agencies of the church. As a global church, we have agencies and boards that oversee and do the work at a global level, just as we do at the local level. The general conference is the quadrennial meeting of the global church. And the next one is in Portland, Oregon, in May of this year. Elected representatives from all over the world come together, and at general conference they work to make decisions about ministries, business matters, personnel concerns, and matter of doctrine and polity, what we believe and how we govern ourselves. Much of that work is done in committees, and then the committees bring their recommendations to the whole body for a vote. Decisions of the General Conference become law for the United Methodist Church. They are written down and published in the Book of Discipline, and what congregations, conference agencies, committees, bishops, and clergies are expected to follow are those rules, until they are perhaps changed at the next General Conference. Those who don't adhere to these rules can be punished for their failure to do so. Those who interpret things differently can appeal to our Judicial Council for clarification and the ruling of law. And those who wish to see things changed can offer amendments, proposals, or changes in language at the next General Conference. But I want you to understand that power in our church, unlike in some others, never rests in the hands of a single individual. There is no one person at the top of the United Methodist Church. We have a group of bishops who oversee our government, church government, much like our country's, is representative. And there are legislative methods, judicial methods, and governing methods that have to be followed as we seek to live out our lives together as united Methodist Christians. Even when we disagree, we agree to follow the rules. That's what it means to be a part of a connectional church. Our most important method, of course, is to honestly and sincerely follow Jesus. It is Christ who's both the cornerstone and the head of the church. And our mission together, from the local congregation to the coming together of faithful followers from all over the globe, is to make disciples of Christ for the transformation of the world. And as United Methodists, we believe that we can accomplish this better together than we could on our own. We're connectional. We are pieces of a puzzle that fit together. And we'll talk more about that next week.